Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw, at Andrew Plaw Tech, with a very exciting episode. We have a returning guest that I'm looking forward to talking to today, Miriam Wiesner. We're going to talk about security, the life as a security researcher, moving into a program manager or project manager of a team of security researchers, what that entails, look into some GraphAPI attacks, and more. But first, I want to tell you about the State of Sysadmin. So, hey, folks, take the 2025 State of Sysadmin survey to share your insights on the IT industry, including cybersecurity trends, salary ranges, AI, and the best IT tools. Link to that will be in the show notes. But let's get right into the interview. Miriam Wiesner, welcome back to the PowerShell Podcast. I think we had you last on in September. Very excited. I've seen you traveling all around the world doing awesome things. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back. Thanks for the invite, Andrew.
So how has it been? Are you kind of settling into your role? Because I know writing a book, and we talked about this on the last podcast, is kind of a big thing. Have things slowed down for you at all?
So the time when I wrote the book, when I finished it, I was still on parental leave, to be honest. And getting back as a new mom with a toddler is also quite challenging. So also from a work-life balance, perspective, it's challenging. And also, I got the offer to start a new role as a security research program manager. Same team, but more responsibilities, more strategic. And it was quite interesting to also learn the new stuff that I'm working with. And basically, it's still a little bit of comfort because I know the team. I know part of the stuff that we've been doing, but now I also had to learn also the project management and cat herding stuff, basically, keeping people together, keeping people aligned, and also do the strategic planning while relying on the results that the researchers tell me.
And that's sort of like an added element, because to me, I have to use from what you're describing, sounds like my responsible parent skills of like managing everything, and also my sort of security side where I'm kind of geeking out doing IT stuff. And you got to kind of fuse both of those together. Has that been easy, natural for you? Because it sounds like you're well suited for it, given how much you're able to do, right? On maternity leave, writing a book, going into a high pressure role. I mean, to me, I look up to you a lot. So I'm looking to gain anything I can from you.
Thank you so much. But to be honest, it's been damn hard. I can't recommend writing or finishing a book while you're raising a child. And also getting back into your job. When you have your little one at home and you're like, I want to cuddle my baby, but now I have to work. And also really balancing those two, because I also want to be, I want to excel in my role, and being a good mom and a good researcher or research PM. This is something that you need to learn how to balance. So I don't want to make it look shiny. It's been a tough journey. It's not always been easy. But you always grow. And the more you are outside of your comfort zone, the more skills you gain and the better you get. And also the skills that I learned for work, I can also use for managing the time at home with my toddler and planning stuff. So it supports each other, but you need to find the best balance, to be honest.
Yeah. And you had some travel this year. I think you went to some conferences from what I was seeing on socials.
Yes. So I, and this was the first conference that I attended or that I spoke at since my son was born. And it was PSConf EU. And the decision was hard to go because you have your little one at home and you're like, I don't want to leave my baby. But I was so honored because PSConf EU actually asked me if I wanted to speak at this conference. And I think this gave me the push to go out and really talk at a conference and leave my son behind. And this also gave me the confidence to also apply for other conferences. So so I also applied for Blue Hat, Microsoft conference, security research conference in Redmond. And I was lucky that they also accepted my presentation. So I had 2 conferences this year and 1 user group presentation. And now I'm on the amazing PowerShell podcast. So things are good.
What did you speak about at PSConf EU, and was it a similar topic to what you did at Blue Hat?
So at PSConf EU, I had 2 presentations. The first one was about Microsoft GraphAPI attacks, and I delivered the same one at Blue Hat as well. And the second one was basically a higher level summary of what security skills or security features, not skills, security features PowerShell has built in. So what can you do? Very summarized, very shortened to improve your security posture with PowerShell. That was the second talk.
And that is I really enjoy that topic because there's a lot, and I think it's so heavily underutilized. All the awesome security features that help differentiate PowerShell and make it a defender's dream are so often not enabled.
Yes, 100%. Especially if you think of logging, there actually already is a feature built in that you get the most critical logs once when you already got hacked, if you did not yet enable PowerShell script log logging. But basically, you are still missing out on so many great details that your SOC can use. And logging is a passion of mine. So this is why I just start directly with logging and events. And basically, the thing is that customers rarely enable script log logging and read in the logs or between the lines. And so that's the reason, because they always just enable it after they were hacked. And that's the reason why there is an initial function, but this is not enough, folks. So if you really want to be on top of what is happening in your org, make sure that you also really enable script log logging, that you review what is in there, and that you also build detections and have people that are common with those logs.
Yeah, I think before we started recording, I heard you mention Kusto. So I guess you work in the kind of Sentinel land these days?
I work in Defender XDR. And basically, yes, everything is about getting all together in the XDR. So not only Sentinel, but also, I don't know if you ever worked with Microsoft 365 Defender or how it was called in the past, MTP, Microsoft Threat Protection. It had a lot of names. We always like to rename our products. And so this product also relies heavily on Kusto if you do advanced hunting. And so
Does Kusto,
Sentinel.
Does Kusto kind of sit in the same place of your brain as PowerShell? Because for me, it does. It kind of makes intuitive sense once you get past the little beginning part.
I need to understand that question a bit better.
Is it similar? Like once you get fluent, does it feel, I mean, whenever I'm writing PowerShell commands in the terminal, I feel empowered. I'm able to type queries and figure things out and add a little bit here and there. And my experience with Kusto is pretty similar, where it's like I can into log analytics and kind of make my query and change it. And it's sort of intuitive, similar to PowerShell, different syntax, but.
I never really thought about comparing those two. But basically, if you are familiar with one language, of course, it just falls very natural. But man, did I little know, or I did not know how little I knew about Kusto before I started the role as a researcher. I thought my Kusto was already great, but guess what? There are so many other functions and so many things that you still can use. So if you already think you know Kusto, go and try to explore Detective Kusto. This is basically a game where you can hunt down any adversary, so to say, and need to solve riddles using Kusto. And it has 2 seasons. And if you feel like it's falling natural, then you are definitely a Kusto Pro. But for me, when I first started it, I was like, what? This function exists? How can I solve this? And so basically, it's the thing how often you use it and for what. And if you just use it for hunting, for some general hunting, you'll feel like me before I started as a researcher. You feel like, oh yeah, I can do it. I'm good with Kusto. And then you just learn how little you know about everything that is there. I feel more familiar with PowerShell, to be honest, although I'm working with Kusto on a daily basis.
Yeah, I guess it's like any language. The more you use it, the more fluent you are. Always a good reminder, especially for those who are less fluent.
Yeah.
But I sort of want to pause here and talk a little bit more about the security features that people should be looking at. It sounds like one that you like to emphasize is deep script block logging, because that's sort of what you want to have happen before things go bad. You don't want to have to pay the security people that you pay to clean things up after there's an incident to enable those. Because I'm pretty sure that's where almost all of it gets enabled, is after an event, you hire that contractor who's done this 100 times, and this is all that they do is they secure and clean up these run-of-the-mill attacks that so many companies fall for. And yeah, so we have that. What is another thing people should look to? And I want to plug the book, first of all. Some great blog series. PowerShell Loves the Blue Team is a great blog article. I'll have links to all this. But shout out to the book, PowerShell Automation and Scripting for Cybersecurity, written by you. So
thank you.
Pick that up. Seriously, get your employers to pay for it. If you haven't implemented PowerShell properly in your org and gotten things configured properly and all that, makes it way easy. But what's another thing you like to point people to? We got script block logging. What else?
Yes. So one thing that is really important, and that is not 100% related to PowerShell in the first place, is keep your identities clean. Have an identity hygiene, because that is one of the worst things that you can do, to not look out for your identities. And if an attacker compromises an identity, it is often so easy to escalate to other identities with higher privileges, which is basically how most attacks happen. But from a PowerShell perspective, what you can also do to support your configuration is, for example, to also apply DSC. So desired state configuration, because there are 2 modes, push and pull. And if you configure your servers, your computers to regularly pull the configuration from a DSC server, from a host where you have the configuration stored, then you have a self-healing configuration, basically. And this is what makes it harder for adversaries to also change any features or any configurations in your environment.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little bit more than just implementing the PowerShell stuff. It makes sense. You have to have your IDP, your identity provider, kind of configured properly. To push on that a little bit more. So imagine we have an unempowered IT team. And I love going to that because I think the bulk of orgs out there are not the most well off in terms of funding and also employees. Some are, maybe more like the Fortune 200s, maybe they're doing well. But most of the people I talk to are struggling. So you have an IT that's a little bit underfunded. Where should they dedicate those resources? So you're saying the IDP is pretty important. Should imagine this place doesn't have a security team either. It's just the sysadmins and engineers kind of handling things. Should one of them sort of specialize in really understanding and locking down the IDP? Is that sort of a primary first interest that they should look at, or is there somewhere else you'd recommend people start?
Yes, I think so. At least they should really lock down their identities and ensure that they have a separated machine for real sensitive tasks. So if you, and I know this is hard, but a SOA, a secure admin workstation, is really vital, because if you use the same machine that you use for your email, for your browsing, and for your daily work, and if this machine gets compromised, and basically it's not the question if, it's the question when, because if you are opening emails, if you are browsing the internet, nobody is safe. Everybody will be compromised eventually. And therefore, if we consider this machine as already compromised or to be compromised soon, also your admin credentials are not secure, and therefore really try to separate it. You don't need to be an expert in security, but you need to think, what can attackers do with that? And the best way to stop that is to have a separate machine. There are different options. Also, if the company has a very tight budget and they don't have the budget to have a SOA for every employee, there are also options that you have some kind of virtualization clients. How are they called? They are those little boxes.
Like containers?
No, you have like a little box, and from this box it's like a PC, but it does not have the power.
Like
I work
soft
with
client,
it.
maybe?
Yeah, something like that.
It's escaping me as well.
I'm sorry. I have not worked as an administrator for more than 15 years, so I'm sorry. I use those virtualization clients. Maybe that's the term. You have a hardware device which you can use to log in to a virtualized machine. This hardware client has very little power and very little hardware, but you can use it to access your virtualized machine and use that as a parallel environment, which is also secured, where your employees have no way to access the emails or to access any browser stuff that they can use for the administration of the most critical and most sensitive devices and infrastructure.
Awesome. Is it called a jump box?
No.
Okay. Apologies.
No worries. I think virtualization device is the best term. I will look it up. I will send it to you, and you can just blend it in.
So SOAs.
And one thing that people always forget is the backup. Backup of tier 0 devices is also tier 0.
Yeah. Definitely important to have those in place. So with this type of SOA, are people doing their entire job on it, or are they doing limited portions of their job?
It depends what they are doing.
Right.
But usually they do limited portions, because they also have emails. They have a chat tool like Teams or anything else, whatever they prefer. And basically, this is what you not run on your saw. You don't open your emails. You don't browse in the internet. And so you basically only do your administrative tasks on the saw. And part of your daily work you do from your client device.
Okay. That makes sense. That's a pretty good tip. I think that that's the type of thing where it's hard to make that type of change retroactively, but it's like the type of cultural thing where you have to like drive it home for a while, incorporate this in the new employee cost. There has to be kind of an additional device that they need. But
Yeah.
it's always interesting to see that challenge with security of like cost versus, the kind of risk decision that some companies need to make.
Yes. And it's not too hard to implement it retrospective, to be honest. So I worked with a lot of companies in the past. So that's also some time ago. I worked with them when I was still working as a PFE at Microsoft. And I experienced many companies also deploying SaaS, implementing their tier 0 infrastructure. And that was such a good change for them. And basically, the sad truth was that every customer I worked with only did this after they were compromised and after we had a forest take back. But some people just need to learn it the hard way.
I feel like it's the orgs that need to learn, because then they can make the different choices with money and take security seriously. But I haven't had a ton of experience actually seeing that in person. Do you think, because for me, I imagine as a security person, right, you have all these attacks all the time, you're underfunded. And you could, if there's no like business driving you towards security, if there's no business initiative, it's all an afterthought. I think it could be kind of easy to just kind of turn off your brain and just be like, okay, this is how things are. Do you see a lot of security teams at orgs who are just kind of, they just give up and they're just waiting for that event to take place? Or where are we on that sort of spectrum?
Basically, the companies don't see themselves that they are just waiting for an event to take place. The companies that I have worked with in the past, they were like, oh, this happens to everybody else, but not to us. And security costs the companies an amount of money, but they don't see the value out of it. So basically, you can say, okay, we invested XYZ into this new product. Now we made some revenue, and you can measure that revenue, how much money you made with that new product. But what money do you make with security? How do you measure that? And that is basically also for many companies the critical part, why they also don't consider security as important. But from what I saw over the years is that the mindset is slowly changing. It's not a quick change, but slowly more and more people also see that security is really important.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful. It's one of the instances where I think joining the community is really helpful. So you work in an org, they don't care about best practices. Maybe you have a coworker or two who's sort of with it. But when you're engaged in the community, maybe you want to go to a conference once a year, maybe you're trying to speak at a user group, whatever. When you're engaged in that, you can sort of adopt what the security community has decided as best practices and all this stuff. And you can use that as your driving force, not the status quo at your work, which might be like, nobody cares about anything. But if you're involved in that community, you take ownership of your career. You want to do things the right way because this isn't your last job, right? You want to gain skills and go to a better org, which maybe has better security and more opportunities to go to conferences and things like that. But if you can make that decision, I think that it'll lead to better things for you long-term, but also your employer on the short term. You'll make things a little bit more secure while you're there.
Yes. And it does not mean if we have always done it that way, that this needs to continue in the future. Maybe it's hard to change something initially, but it can always be done. And it also depends on the people that you work with and if you can convince them to get something done. And sometimes, in some cases, you just need to provide the data and say, hey, look, this is how most companies are being compromised. And this happened X, Y, Z in the last year or something, maybe some numbers that you can find in the internet. I can't provide them right now. I'm sorry. But just if you see something that is happening in your company that you don't agree, often it also helps to just back it up with data.
Yeah, inform them of what the things are so they can make a decision. Because maybe they're not even aware that we don't have this one thing enabled that we could enable that would change our approach. And I think it practices those communication skills, because so many security and IT issues are ultimately sort of come down to people at the end of the day. And you're going to continue to interact with people like that. So having these conversations, maybe changing the way that your team communicates about security topics or whatever you're working on really can go a long way at setting you up for success in the future.
Yes.
Oh, I love those. I love talking about security because it's such a multifaceted challenge. Like, it's not just one thing, right? You actually implement things, it gets a little sticky sometimes, which, I like challenges, and that makes it pretty challenging, I imagine. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was always drawn to security, and it was not really, for me, it was never really a challenge. The only challenge that I experienced were the people, because you had to convince the people, and that was the challenge basically. Mm-hmm. But I did not start in security, but I was always drawn into security, and at some point I finally managed to get in there.
You didn't only get in there, you got a pretty good role too. I mean, you do some exciting stuff. I'm so happy that we get to chat and have interactions like this, because there's definitely a period in my life where I would go over the moon to get a chance to talk with someone from Microsoft, let alone a security researcher who really gets hands-on and gets to see all these insights and develop sort of a mature perspective on security day in and day out, sort of be engaging with it. That is really cool. So congrats to you. And also writing books, going to conferences, raising humans all at the same time is just, you're a winner in my book. So I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us, because there's a lot. But security isn't hard for you. That is interesting. I think there's that phrase, security is hard. I think that for me, the challenge was in my last role, where it's like our setup wasn't so good. We had backups, which was nice, but everything else was sort of a whole new world of things that you can implement. And when it gets to be that, it can be a little bit tiresome to see sort of the long game when there's so many small steps you have to take along the way, which is where like a program manager type is very helpful to sort of keep you understanding where we are on the roadway and the next steps we got to take.
Yeah. So the current role that I have is more strategic than the last one. Basically, I still do research, but I can also multiply my work through other researchers and also do the planning and keep the team together. Basically, I'm the glue between research, PM, engineering, and so the planning is a new skill that I'm currently learning, because I was always a very technical person. And when I was hired at Microsoft, they hired me for thinking like an attacker. So this is the way why security is not hard for me. But now, using the mindset of thinking like an attacker and convert that into actual detections and correlations, and also plan for the future how to improve the quality of our product. That is something that I see more of a challenge than just security. So I think just the skills around that. Yeah.
It's always nice to see the transition of different domains to be more collaborative. Maybe they start off as one thing, and now we got the whole purple team and all the kind of flavors in between that just lead to more secure organizations. I want to dive into the life of a security researcher. You mentioned you got the promotion. You're a program manager now, so you're sort of on a team helping guide them throughout their thing. And prior to that, you were a security researcher. So I'm curious to hear, like, what's the workflow of a security researcher? Are you given certain topics and that's sort of your primary focus throughout the day, maybe a few meetings throughout it to take advantage of your interests and knowledge? But what does it look like?
Yeah, so basically, as a security researcher, I had certain topics that I was doing research on. And there was also the chance that I could find my own topics to perform research on if it was useful for the business or for the plan of our org. And so I did research on some topics also together with other researchers in some cases or with data scientists. And one example was, for example, the Microsoft Graph research that we did. And the one thing I'm passionate about is also offensive research. And so whenever I get the chance, I'm like, oh yes, let me do the demo. And so in this project, I also had the chance to build the demo to test our detections that we are building. And so this is also how the Microsoft Graph API presentation came together. The echoes of intrusion, demystifying Microsoft Graph API attack.
And I'll have a link to that in the show notes if people want to check that presentation out. It came out a few months ago on the YouTube. But what were some of your takeaways that you found in that? Were there anything interesting, any novel attacks you saw? Anything common?
Well, any novel attacks? That's an interesting question because, well, it's always about identities. Everything basically that I see where people are escalating privileges and getting into the system, basically it's always identities.
Yeah.
There are some vulnerabilities out there. Okay, yes, that's true. But there are only very few really, really smart people that know how to abuse them. And it's really hard to find a zero-day exploit. And so attackers usually try to compromise identities. And what I also found really interesting is that you also need to look out what permissions you assign to service principals. A service principal is some kind of a service account within Azure. And the service principal is the account that operates the application. And if you assign certain rights to an application and you don't really know what you're doing, this could really lead to an escalation. And for example, one other thing that I found interesting, so after the presentation at PSConf EU, there was someone coming up to me after the presentation, and this person was like, oh my gosh, because in this presentation, one part of the attack chain is that in a very simplified attack chain, I had a user that was the owner of an application, and this user added credentials to this application to log in as service principal. And after this presentation, someone came to me and was like, oh my God, I did not know that the owner account or the owner attribute would give so much power. Actually, we need to rethink how we are doing things because we were using the owner to indicate who was owning the application. But now our entire worldview is destroyed. And he immediately worked with his colleagues to work towards a solution. And I found that really interesting. And it also really made me really humble to see that people were following up on the presentation and on the research, that they really found some value for their orgs and already started with their work while they were at the conference. And it really makes me feel super humble. So yeah, that's that was a really fascinating experience.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot so far. I have a few wrap-up questions to sort of get things headed in the right direction. You mentioned this early on, but what advice do you have for other women or mothers out there who are trying to find the balance between having a successful career and also raising a child? Because that's a very challenging ask, I imagine.
Yeah, that's a very, very personal question as well. Basically, you cannot do everything. That's the thing. I think the Barbie movie summarized that perfectly. There is a monologue where she says that you need to do everything perfect, but you can't do that. Some people will try to tell you that it is possible to spend enough time with your child while you have a full-time job. And basically, you need to compromise. You always need to compromise. And you need to find the best solution that works for you. So for me, I learned it the hard way, because in Germany, we usually, you get 1 year to stay at home with your child, and then you return to work. And I was like, well, I'm not a housewife. I will not stay at home an entire year. Yeah, my husband can do that. So I returned to work after 5 months, and it destroyed me. I was so jealous of everybody that spent time with my son, because I had to work while other people had time with my son, and I was still not over it. And so what I did, I learned from it, and I took 3 more months of unpaid parental leave. Well, this just threw everything completely around at my work, and this was really a hard time for me, work-wise and personal life-wise as a mom. But I found out that this was the right thing to do, because I wanted to spend more time with my son, and this was the way. And after that, I also asked to reduce my hours to 6 hours per day, which is still a lot, at least here in Germany. But I have the luck to work from home, and so I don't have a way that I need to. I don't have to drive to work every day. So I go into my office and I'm here. Yes, I can work. And daycare is just very close nearby. And my advice is to listen to yourself. What is the right solution for you? You always need to compromise and find that solution. Also work with your manager. It also depends on the persons, of course, that you work with, if they know how it is to be a parent sometimes or not. And I have the most awesome manager I could ever imagine. He does everything in his power to make my life easy at work and also for my work-life balance. And I could not think of a better manager. So yeah, thanks. By the way, if you're listening to this.
Well, thank you so much for that answer. That was very thoughtful. I think there's a lot of great things that people can take away, even if they're not moms. Listening to yourself,
Yes.
advocating for yourself, and if you make a choice that you later have second thoughts on, or maybe it wasn't the right direction for you, it's okay. Trust yourself, get to know yourself, all that kind of stuff. So impactful. Miriam, thank you so much for joining again. People have loved what you've said. They love security. They love PowerShell. They even like Kusto. Where can we find you on the World Wide Web?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter and on Mastodon, but it's not called Twitter anymore. It's called X. But since that change, I'm not that active on X and on Mastodon. So I think the best way is to follow me on LinkedIn. but maybe also on X and Mastodon if you have the accounts. I post there from time to time, but not as active as I used to be in the past. But well, as a mom, you don't spend your time on social media that much.
Yes, you got to choose your battles.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone out there for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard today, you like PowerShell, you like security, spread the episode. Give us a like, comment, subscribe. Maybe leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. We are worldwide. Miriam, thank you again. Everybody, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.